It was a chilly December afternoon in 2017 when Mandy Stavik heard a knock echo through her home. The day happened to be her 81st birthday, yet she felt no urge to mark the occasion. In truth, she hadn't wanted to celebrate for the past 28 years, not since the tragic November day in 1989 when her teenage daughter Mandy was found murdered. Her killer had never been caught. When 1-year-old Mary opened the door, she was met by a police officer, an image that instantly took her back, as an officer had been the one to inform her of her daughter's discovery, discarded like refuse all those years ago. But this time, the uniformed visitor didn't come bearing heartbreaking news. Instead, he had just 3 short words to deliver. And no, they weren't. Happy birthday, Mary. They were the 3 words she had waited nearly 30 years to hear. We got him. Amanda Stavik, lovingly called Mandy, was born in Anchorage, Alaska. She possessed a rare combination of athleticism and intellect. At Mount Baker High School, she cheered, ran track, and played baseball, earning the admiration of all her teachers. After graduating, Mandy enrolled at Central Washington University, where she thrived. She had a generous spirit, always ready to help others. Her mother described her as someone who embraced every challenge, determined to excel at whatever she tried. When the crime occurred, Mandy was a freshman in college, visiting her family in Acme, Washington, a small rural spot in Whatcom County, for the Thanksgiving holiday. The Staviks gathered each year to reconnect and swap stories about their lives since the last holiday, a tradition that was warm and familiar. The following day, once everyone had either departed or started packing to leave, Mandy slid back into her regular habits. On the 24th of November, 1989, the 8-year-old laced up for a jog around her neighborhood. Running was one of her favorite activities, and her loyal German shepherd Kyra often trotted alongside. It was a ritual they both cherished nearly every day. Several people noticed Mandy that morning, including a man in a pickup truck who saw her jogging with Kyra. The road was considered safe, and as in many small towns of the era, crime was unusual. In 1989, home security cameras were rare, and many locals didn't even lock their doors. Mandy had followed this same route countless times before, but just because danger had never appeared didn't mean it never would, and tragically, this particular run would be her last. Hours later, her parents realized something chilling. Mandy never came home. This instantly set off alarms for the family. Mandy was habitually punctual, and Kyra was always with her. She wasn't the type to make sudden plans or take the dog elsewhere without notice, and she'd been dressed only in running gear. She always told her parents where she was going. Hours passed with no sign of her, and the worry turned into urgent fear. Friends and relatives began searching the area. Then, in the distance, they spotted something. At first, they couldn't make out what it was, but as they got closer, the figure became clear. Kyra was heading home alone. The dog's return without Mandy was a troubling sign. Kyra appeared exhausted, dehydrated, and visibly anxious. Those looking for Mandy now knew that something terrible might have happened. Concern deepened as police became involved, and the Staviks officially reported Mandy missing. The search for Mandy was massive and quickly drew intense attention. No one had imagined that something so terrible could occur in the quiet, tight-knit town of Acme, yet now the entire community was shaken. Women and girls became fearful of even walking outside during daylight. Parents grew uneasy letting their children head to school or even visit nearby friends. Detectives began working immediately. Mandy was clearly not a runaway. She had left the house in running clothes and pink sneakers, with all her belongings, cash, and essentials still at home. There was no sign she had prepared to leave for any length of time. Officers retraced the route she usually took. It was an ordinary road, but some stretches were bordered by dense woods set a short distance back. The area was fairly secluded, with long gaps where no cars or people passed by, typical for a rural setting like Acme. The hunt went on for days, fueled by both police and volunteers from the community who refused to give up. Then, 3 days after Mandy's disappearance, a chilling discovery was made. Detective Ron Peterson led one of the search teams. On the 27th of November, 1989, he reached the Nooksack River, located about 3 miles from where Mandy had been jogging. As he scanned the water, a flash of pink caught his eye. Convinced it was no illusion, he moved closer. It was a pair of sneakers, but they weren't simply floating, they were on someone's feet. Submerged beneath the water was the disrobed body of a young woman. Peterson needed no ID to recognize her. It was Mandy Stavik. The grim truth everyone had dreaded was now undeniable. What began as a missing persons case had turned into a homicide investigation. Mandy's body was sent for forensic testing and autopsy. Results painted a harrowing picture. She had drowned, and evidence showed she had been sexually assaulted beforehand. Scratches and defensive wounds suggested she had tried to flee and may have been caught in thorny blackberry bushes while resisting her attacker. Investigators also found an unidentified male DNA sample. But in 1989, forensic technology was far too limited to track a suspect from DNA alone. They needed far more information about who Mandy had been with during her final hours. Finding Mandy's body marked the start of a long and exhausting investigation, one that would stretch through hundreds of tips, countless false leads, and ultimately decades of frustration. Detectives began by questioning everyone close to her: male friends, acquaintances, and her boyfriend at the time, Rick. Every possibility had to be ruled out before moving on to others. Despite these efforts, nothing panned out. Around 30 men from Acme volunteered DNA samples to compare with the evidence taken from Mandy's body, but no match was found. Tips poured in daily. Some claimed a drifter passing through had abducted her, while others insisted they'd seen her alive earlier that day. None of these leads produced anything useful. The police chased down every shred of information they received. With so little evidence to work from, tips and eyewitness accounts were their only avenue. Even the flimsiest possibilities were pursued to the very end, but the suspect had left almost nothing behind. Without a witness or a confession, solving the case seemed nearly impossible. To encourage more information, authorities offered a $25,000 reward for any lead that would lead to an arrest. Yet even that produced nothing of value. If such a large sum couldn't entice someone to come forward, the detectives wondered what possibly could. The situation left them uncertain about how to proceed. They couldn't allow the case to simply fade into obscurity. The safety of their community was at stake, but lead after lead collapsed, and time kept passing. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months, and months to years, until the case fell cold. Still, Mandy's murder was never forgotten. The horrifying event stayed fresh in local memory for decades. Everyone in town knew her story. And then, in June 2013, a completely unexpected development emerged, one that would finally change everything. In June 2013, investigators were approached by two mothers from near Bellingham, Washington, both unsettled by a suspicion they couldn't ignore. The women, Heather Backstrom and Marilee Anderson, had been reminiscing about a day spent years earlier at Birch Bay water slides. They were sitting on the grass, chatting while their kids played in the water, when talk drifted to the still unsolved murder of Mandy Stavik. Even after more than 20 years, her death remained a common subject in the community. People often revisited that haunting November and shuddered at the thought that her killer had never been caught. Heather and Marilee each remembered strange, uncomfortable encounters they'd had with the same man, both occurring before and after Mandy's murder. His name was Timothy Bass, a former Mount Baker High School student like them. Marilee recalled that a few years after the crime, Tim had shown up at her home one evening while her husband was away. She was alone with her baby when he knocked, looking disheveled, and asked to use her phone. Letting him in, she soon realized the call was just a pretense. He wandered through her house, even into the bedroom, before turning to declare his love and his wish to be with her, despite obvious signs she was married with a child. Feeling uneasy and alarmed, Marilee threatened to call the police, and though she couldn't recall exactly how she got him out, he eventually left. Heather's encounter had been years earlier, right before Mandy's murder. At age 15, she was driving home from a softball game with Tim and another young man named Dan. Tim stared at her uncomfortably, then blurted out a compliment about her eyes before running a pen across her bare knee. The behavior disgusted her, and she deliberately avoided him afterward. Looking back, both women felt a gnawing question. Could Timothy Bass have been involved in Mandy's death? They had no proof, just a shared gut feeling, but they decided they couldn't stay silent. When they shared Tim's name with investigators, the reaction was immediate: shock. Bass had never been on the suspect list during the original investigation. Once Timothy Bass was identified, detectives began digging deeper. He had lived in Acme at the time, only 2 miles from Mandy's home, and his property sat right along her usual jogging route. From there, he could have easily spotted her running that day. Investigators were determined to question him about what he remembered. Surprisingly, Bass had never appeared on police radar during the 1989 investigation. His DNA wasn't among the samples collected in the mass testing. Part of the reason was his reputation. He was seen as a polite, quiet man. His family was well-liked. He kept mostly to himself. And by 2013, he was married with 3 children, working as a delivery driver. When police knocked on his door, Bass answered. Asked about Mandy Stavik, he initially claimed he didn't recall her at all, a response that stunned the officers. Mandy's case was unforgettable and accurate. Even people born after the tragedy knew about it, so the idea that he'd simply forgotten seemed implausible. Eventually, he said he vaguely remembered her as the girl found in the river. He was detached, showing no emotion or concern about her fate. Detectives then asked if he had ever been romantically or physically involved with Mandy. After some thought, Bass firmly denied it. The officers requested a DNA sample, but Bass refused, insisting he was worried about being framed for something he hadn't done. While not illegal, his refusal only heightened their suspicion. Since he wouldn't provide it voluntarily, they knew they'd have to find another way. Bass's background revealed a troubled personality. As a teenager, he was isolated and prone to anger, especially after a breakup that ended with him threatening self-harm. His resentment toward women seemed to grow. He married a woman named Gina only weeks after Mandy's death, and according to her, life quickly turned into a cycle of emotional and mental abuse. Detectives suspected Bass was the man they were looking for. They just needed the DNA. That's when an ally stepped forward, his boss, Kim Wagner. Agreeing to help, she kept an eye out for an opportunity. Months later, she saw him toss away a Coke can and a plastic cup. She retrieved them and handed them to police. Lab tests confirmed the match. Bass's DNA was identical to the sample recovered from Mandy's body over 2 decades earlier. That left one explanation: he had been the one to attack and kill her. In December 2017, nearly 30 years after the crime, 50-year-old Timothy Bass was arrested for kidnapping, sexual assault, and murder. The news reached Mary on her birthday, delivering the gift she'd waited decades for: the sight of her daughter's killer finally in custody. During the trial, prosecutors laid out their version of events. Timothy Bass had likely watched Mandy from his home, possibly on a regular basis. On the day of the crime, they believe he struck her on the head as she jogged, possibly even harming Kyra, the dog. He then transported her roughly 3 miles from the jogging path where he sexually assaulted her. They argued that Mandy put up a fierce fight, at one point even managing to break free, but Bass overpowered her again. In the end, he drowned her and left her body in the river, treating her life as disposable. The DNA on Mandy's body, they maintained, was conclusive proof he was the attacker. There was no other reasonable explanation. But Bass's defense team threw out a shocking claim that he and Mandy had been involved in a secret sexual relationship, meeting regularly, and that was why his DNA was present. They insisted this was also the reason she took that specific running route each day. It was a story meant to deflect blame, but it had a major flaw. Back in 2013, when questioned by police, Bass had denied even knowing Mandy personally, much less having any kind of intimate relationship. The contradiction was glaring. Prosecutors pointed out there was zero evidence to support his version: no phone calls, no sightings of them together, no mutual friends who could verify it. Mandy and Bass had essentially been strangers. His ex-wife Gina testified that she overheard Bass pleading with his mother to tell police it was his father who killed Mandy. Bass had even approached his brother Tom to back his false narrative, claiming Mandy had been involved with both of them, in an effort to tarnish her name and muddy the case. But none of these tactics worked. On May 24, 2019, after nearly 3 decades, the jury returned its verdict: guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted in tears of relief as the verdict was read. 3 decades of searching, setbacks, and heartache had finally led to justice. Bass received the maximum sentence possible without a premeditated murder charge. 27 years in prison, a term likely long enough to ensure he never walks free again. Given how the investigation had unfolded, many had feared Mandy's murder would remain an unsolved cold case, suspended in time without closure. But persistence had paid off, and the man responsible was now locked away. A large part of that success came from Bass's boss, Kim Wagner, whose willingness to take a risk, allowed detectives to secure the crucial DNA evidence. Credit also went to Heather Backstrom and Marilee Anderson, whose recollections of Bass's disturbing behavior helped revive the investigation. Special Prosecutor David McEachran, who returned from retirement to lead the case, saw it through to victory. The community, too, played an important role, keeping Mandy's memory alive and refusing to let her story fade. Most of all, the Stavik family's determination ensured the fight for justice never stopped. Even after 30 years, they pressed forward, unwilling to let the crime be forgotten. Mandy had been a young woman with plans, dreams, and a full life ahead of her, all stolen in an instant. While imagining what could have been is painful, what matters now is that her killer will never harm another person.